You served in the Ohio legislature from 2007 to 2012. It was reported that you ran each of your 3 successful races in a swing district as a positive campaign. With the political culture of today, where candidates often try to out-mudsling each other by digging up dirt on their opponent, how did you maintain such a positive campaign?
You know, a lot of people have asked me that question, Mark, and it really was the basis for why I wanted to get involved. I determined I wanted to do it differently. I determined that I felt comfortable with who I was and that I didn't need to take anybody down as part of my campaign, even though I was running against an incumbent and the margin was, I'm a Democrat, the margin was 55-45 in favor of the Republican incumbent. And all the political professionals say you got to beat him up, but it didn't have to be done. I felt comfortable, and indeed, when the negative advertising came out, I responded, but not in kind, and just said that's not the way I intend on running. I got positive editorials from the newspaper, which normally supports Republicans as a result, and I got a lot of emails from my Republican friends saying, thank you for doing this, and we're sorry for our colleague who's doing this to you. So it was pretty exciting.
And were you known by any of those entities prior to entering the race?
Which entities in terms of?
The newspaper, the press, the other politicians?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing for the newspaper that first time out is they'd supported my opponent in the past, and their editorial endorsement ended up being one for both of us. And in mine, they basically said, we want you to keep an eye on this person because he's trying to do it differently, and really highlighted the positive campaign as part of that. I went door to door. When I went door to door, the people said, thank you so much for running a positive campaign. And then it just continued for the next 2 campaigns as a result.
So you had never really even considered doing it the opposite way?
No, I hadn't. And interestingly enough, my opponent at the time, there were lots of things that I could have said, and people wanted me to say, and my caucus said you should use, and I said, no, you don't need to do that. And it was a little testy, but I went to a group of friends, including my campaign chairman, who, interestingly enough, for a Democrat, he's a pediatric heart surgeon, not somebody you'd think that would be involved that way. And he admired this, doing it differently. And I said, I'm going to need to call on you. They're going to do an ad against me, I'm sure, that's going to test us, and I'll call you. So they did. They ran, I'm Italian, they ran an ad that had the little Godfather logo and said, he'll make you a deal you can't refuse. And we just held a little press conference and called on the newspaper to say we weren't going to do anything like that, and they responded very favorably. The ironic twist is my opponent, whose name was Smith, his father changed their name from Esposito. So here was an Italian, right? So it was ironic.
Well, that segues really well into my next question is, what advice, Ted, would you give a state legislator who is facing a campaign and knows that his or her character will be called into question with negative ads, etc.? And how does one remain positive in that kind of situation?
Yeah, it's tough, but I think, and it's tough with your family because your family sees this and says, what's going on? And I think you just have to be comfortable with who you are. That's an important part, and that you are not going to compromise your integrity if you believe in this idea of civility and a positive campaign. That you'll get through it, and you'll find that you get energy from running a campaign that way. And interestingly enough, as I've compared notes with colleagues around the country, more and more people are finding this is true. And that's encouraging, too, to those people who say, well, our caucus says you got to beat them up. And I say, we have examples where it doesn't have to be done that way.
You mentioned the word integrity, one of my favorite words. How can you expound on that a little bit, on how integrity comes into play in this kind of negative political world we live in sometimes?
I think it relates to one's belief system and how we communicate and the need to deal with each other with respect. And if we're expecting to be able to work with people in the future, it's not going to help us to tear them down before an election, and then turn around and say, well, he's a good guy and we can work together. So it's a really an issue of being comfortable with knowing that you are taking the road of listening carefully to others as part of the process and trying to find common ground. That's an important beginning place for me.
How were you received then after these positive campaigns with people across the aisle? You're known for your effectiveness in working with both sides, both parties, I should say.
Sure, that's a good question, because when I got into office that first week and went into our caucus and everybody talked about the political issues and how it was we and them, and that's not how I'd run, and that's not how I wanted to run, and that part was a little difficult. But I realized if I was going to make a difference and do it my way, I just needed to do that. And so I reached out to a number of Republicans, and with all of my legislation, so that it was unique in Ohio that they just made a decision to allow for joint lead co-sponsorship of bills, so a bipartisan bill. Wow. And that was in my freshman year. So that was great. So I was able to do that right from the beginning. And I was a Democrat. We were in the minority, and our speaker at the time was a Republican who instituted that, which I thought was a great idea. Yeah.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because I was just going to ask you what the response of the leadership of the legislature was to you running sort of a unique way, right? With
Right.
being positive and not mudslinging.
Well, in a way, the leadership, said, well, that's all that's Ted. That's a good idea, but don't everybody get any ideas here. We need to, maintain our charge, to get there. And where it seeped into what led to what I'm doing now is in my second term. So we were now in the majority, my second term. And so I went to my leadership. I said, I have a bill. The particular bill I wanted to introduce was on dyslexia. Not a very partisan bill. This was right before the 2010 elections. And I said, I want my lead co-sponsor to be the minority leader, because he really has an interest in this. And they said, no, we're not going to let you do that because we don't want to show that Republicans care. And I said, what? And I said, well, we went ahead and introduced it, but of course, since we were in the majority, that bill didn't go anywhere. Fast forward, we lost the election, we lost the majority. The minority leader now becomes speaker, and the speaker comes back to me and said, we got to get our bill passed. I'm going to get another Republican for your bill, and we're going to get it passed. And we did.
And you did.
And we
with
did.
the bipartisan support.
Yeah. So it worked. It worked the way it should.
So tell us what you're doing now in this Institute for Civil Discourse and how this all relates to your background.
It's really pretty exciting. What happened in my third term is due to redistricting, I got redrawn into another district, which for a lot of people would have been much more attractive. It was very Democratic, but there was another Democrat incumbent in it. So that was the idea. And we have term limits in Ohio. He had a lot more time left, so I determined that I wasn't going to run for that seat, and instead was really passionate about this idea of trying to find common ground and work across the aisle. And I'd had some experience with working with small group discussions and trying to build the civil discourse. It was about that time that the National Institute for Civil Discourse was focusing on Washington, and I said, let's get a program that's focused on state legislatures. 51% of the people who end up in Congress come from the state houses. So let's get them trained now on how to work across the aisle, how to have civil discourse, how to really listen. And they liked the idea. We created it and had our first workshop in December of 2012 in Ohio. And we've since had 9 states have workshops. 3 states have held it twice now. It's called Building Trust Through Civil Discourse. And we just met this Sunday here at NCSL. It was great. We're building a national network of state legislators who are committed to civil discourse. And we've got a base of about 50 legislators already, and we're going to expand that. And as part of that day, we ended up with a reception giving an award to 2 legislators who kind of led the charge in the state of Washington. Representative Sam Hunt and Representative Hans Zeiger were given the first, which will become annual award, called the Gabrielle Giffords Award for Civility and State Governance. And she was there to present it. It was pretty powerful, and it was really exciting.
That's really interesting. So if I'm a legislator from some state and I want to come to this institute, how do I go about it, and what sorts of things can I expect to learn
Good question.
while I'm attending?
Part of the process is finding people in the states who are passionate about this and who'd like to find a colleague across the aisle that would become what we call our champions. And they then try to work with leadership in setting up a date that will accommodate the best attendance. And for a half a day, we have a half-day workshop. We'd like to include a meal as part of the workshop. It's really important that breaking bread together is all part of it. And then we do a series of activities in the workshop that are really aimed at getting people to learn how to communicate, to listen better. And we do an exciting part of the workshop is called the political journey. And we ask people to think about what is the most important event in your life that had the largest impact on who you are politically today. Most people don't think about that, in the ordinary course of events. And when they go into that thought process, it's incredible what kind of sharing then goes on for the rest of the session. And we really get to a point where people are saying, here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and this is our action plan to get there. And that's how the workshop works.
Did you mention one of the recipients was Hans Hunt?
No, Hans Zeiger.
Oh, Hans
and
Zeiger.
Sam Hunt. Yeah,
Excuse
Hans
me,
Zeiger
okay.
is the Republican, and Sam Hunt's the Democrat.
Okay, excuse me.
And they were our co-champions there.
I just retired from Wyoming, and Hans Hunt is
Okay.
a friend, and I saw him last night. How do you answer your critics of the Institute saying you're wasting your time, look at Congress, it can't seem to work together to accomplish anything?
Right.
How do you,
well, we have to,
how do you answer
we have to
that?
demonstrate the success. I mean, we talked about this day before yesterday at our session. A couple of the legislators were there who attended the first one, and a Democrat who'd been there sitting next to a Republican who she'd not really interacted with. They were both freshmen. Determined that they were going to try to find something they could work on. So from December to February, they found an issue which they both had passion about, adoption and finding birth parents as part of it, opening up records so you could find birth parents. It bill passed. Huge number of people are impacted by this, 400,000 people in Ohio. It's a direct result of the two of them sitting down together and talking about what can we do together. Otherwise, that never would have happened. So that's kind of opening the door to that kind of discussion. We have other stories where resolutions are now introduced in suggesting that this kind of training be offered to all incoming members. So we're seeing results, and we're seeing passion, particularly among young people. The millennials are really engaging in this, and that's very exciting.
Yeah. Has there been any interest expressed by any members of Congress on what you're doing with this
Well,
institute?
we have a program. We don't do it this way in Congress. We have a counterpart. My counterpart's in D.C. She worked on the Hill for a long time, and her challenge is identifying folks who'd share that passion. And one of the things we're finding in many cases, it's women. It's women in the Senate in particular. There was just an article this week, I think, about, that's where the compromise appears to be coming from, is when you get the women together. She's also found that there are a number of former governors there who also are able to get together and share. So they're not quite as far along in D.C. as here, but I think our goal and why we do the national network is, some of these people are headed to Congress. They will be, and we want to have a pool of people who are talented and know, they'll know each other when they get to D.C.
That's great. How would you say that the public demand for civil discourse and a government that works is in the best interest of the country as a whole? To that, you just respond, duh. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that it certainly is. It's exemplified. We're the role models, right? So if we're yelling at each other, then the media yells at each other or yells at us, and then the people do among each other. You look at it on social media. I mean, it's nasty, and it's to the point where people don't really get that these words that they're saying have profound impact on people, and they can be harmful, hurtful words that really make a difference. So I think the message is that it's time for all of us to step back, take a deep breath, say we're all in this place, on the planet for a small period of time. We need to get along. If we're going to make things happen, we got to find common ground, and that's what it's all about. And there's more and more articles lately about this happening. And I just saw something about Bob Dole, back in the day, saying, we managed to get things done, and we don't have to give up our principles. We can continue to disagree, but let's be friends. Let's do this together. Let's not call each other liars and who knows what. That's all part of it.
I love the stories of when Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House and Ronald Reagan was the President, but they both were Irish in common, and so they would often go to an Irish pub and enjoy a beer or something.
Right, well, exactly, and that's part of what happens as a result of these workshops is we find that caucuses generally in each of the states are recommended not to intermingle, and there's not really much chance for folks to get together on a social basis. And if you don't know somebody very well, it's a lot easier to attack them. Once you get to know them, you know about their families, it makes a difference.
Yes, it does. You can't really hate someone you're trying to care about, right?
Yeah, well, even you can't call them some names that you might otherwise easily come to your lips. You wouldn't do that. And as people point out, even in the good old days when they found compromise, they argue forcefully for their point, but they just wouldn't call each other liar. They wouldn't do. It just the atmosphere's changed, the culture's changed on what's okay. It's not okay. We got to get back to that time where what's right is really working together and having a little understanding and compassion and caring for each other.
Well, I think it sounds like you're doing very good things in a much needed area of politics. Is there anything else that you would add that I have not asked you this morning, Ted?
I'd just say that this is exciting for me. Back when I was thinking about this, it's a little bit for me like I like to call it my man's experience at birthing. I had this idea. I really thought it was important. I knew other people shared the idea, but until you say something, people don't really raise it up. And just watching how this seed has been planted and how it's growing is very exciting. And I want other people out there to know that there's a lot of support for this. And that if you're interested, people will be there. A lot of our present. One of the things we've done is trained legislators to be facilitators. So we have a Republican and a Democrat go to other states. They don't do it in their own state. They go to other states. We've trained 27 legislators from 16 states. We're going to have another training at the end of the year, and that's part of the process. And it's like ambassadors to spread the message. It's working really well.
Excellent. And how can people get in touch with you with the Institute? Is there a website?
There's a website, nicd.arizona.edu is the best way to do that. The email for me is tceleste@email.arizona.edu. And even though I'm located in Ohio, most of the offices in Tucson at the University of Arizona. We also have a DC office.
Great. Well, I really want to thank you for
Sure,
spending
happy to.
time and talking about such an important issue.
Thank you for raising the questions, and I hope we can encourage more people to participate. We had one of the things that happened was we had a really nice article in State Line, and as a result, we've had a number of states take the initiative. As opposed to us trying to find individuals, they read about it, said, this sounds exciting. Would you come do this for our whole legislature if we can do it? And we're looking at a couple states now with that as well. So I think the time is right. Pretty exciting.
So entire states could ask for you to come
Yes.
and facilitate.
Yeah, and
some
we'd
of this
have
training.
we'd have a number of facilitators come with us and kind of break it down into small groups. Yeah, be exciting.
That's great. I really want to thank you.